Matt Sekeres here alongside Blake Price, Grady Sask, hitting switches, conducting things, a special emergency edition of Sekeres and Price after the Canucks swing a massive trade for Calgary centerman Elias Lindholm. And Blake, it's all brought to you by our friends at Applewood Auto Group.
And Applewood has so many great dealers to choose from, but hey, I'm going to pick the one closest to home for me or closest to the heart for me, Mitsubishi. In the Richmond Auto Mall, Applewood Mitsubishi's got the Outlander GT right on. I mean, the 2024 with financing rates from 4.99% plus the industry's best warranty. Go check them all out because it's all good at Applewood.
Yeah, it sure is. And we're firing a poll question at Sekeres and Price on Twitter and YouTube. Do you like the Elias Lindholm trade for the Vancouver Canucks? Well, let's just reset everything that's happened in advance of the All-Star game, Blake. And we actually took these couple of days off as Sekeres and Price, the Daily Show, with no games going on, the Canucks on their bye week, but reminded listeners as we were heading out the door on Monday, if big news breaks, there will be an emergency pod and show. And sure enough, here we are. You don't see many 5-for-1 trades in the National Hockey League. This kind of reminds me of like a big baseball trade, Blake, where, somebody moves at the deadline for a number of pieces. So let's just run it down in terms of what's happened here. The Canucks acquire Elias Lindholm, the Calgary centerman. They are trading Andrei Kuzmenko, the winger who had such a marvelous first-year NHL campaign for them last year with 39 goals. They are trading a pair of prospects here. Hunter Brzustewicz would be the big name, the right shot, third-round defenseman from the Kitchener Rangers, an American who is just tearing up the Ontario Hockey League this year, setting records. Joni Jurmo, a draft pick from several years ago, a big Finn who didn't look like he was working out, more of a stalling out prospect. And then a first-round pick in 2024 and a conditional fourth-round pick. First things first, buddy, we're going to try and get Jeff Paterson in here. Jeff is traveling, so we're hopeful that we'll get some cooperative Wi-Fi and technology wherever Jeff's at. Your first impressions of the trade, Blake?
Well, let me say this. Joni Jurmo, the longest of long shots. A third-round pick that is a heavily defensive-oriented defenseman. If he even has a chance of making it here, has been playing the last few years in the SM Liga. I'm going to throw him out. It's the longest odds of scratching wins. The fourth-round pick, I'm throwing out as well. Because, folks, the condition upon that is that they make it to the Western Conference Final. If they make it to the Western Conference Final with this roster, you give exactly zero shits about the fact that you have to give them that fourth-round pick. So you're throwing that out. So you're basically down to Brzustewicz, the first-round pick this year, and Andrei Kuzmenko, which I will throw it back in your court here, Matt. Is Andrei Kuzmenko, and we have to search within our souls, addition by subtraction here, in that he was never going to find his footing again and his scoring touch again. He has another year on his contract that the Vancouver Canucks would be guaranteed to have to pay up of over $5 million per season. And it opens up some cap space for them, a little bit of extra cap space with the salaries going back and forth, that you could also argue even within that scope, it's a positive. So, in a lot of ways, it might, for me, come down to just Brzustewicz and the first-round pick.
So I'll answer your question in sort of a middle-of-the-road fence-sitting way, but I do think there's a difference between this year and next year. It is not an inconsequential loss to this year's roster or lineup. We talked about this last week. The next forward up for the Vancouver Canucks, beyond your 12 in a playoff series, for now, and that could change, is Linus Karlsson, who hasn't shown a heck of a lot, nor Phil DiGiuseppe, lest we forget PDG, who has been hurt. So we talked about how the Vancouver Canucks were not the deepest group of forwards to begin with. And we also talked about how some of the players that are out on the market could be acquired without having to give up a forward, thus bolstering your depth. I still wasn't willing to count Kuzmenko completely out for either what's left of this regular season or as a specialist contributor in the playoffs if you need a goal, if you get an injury to an offensive player, and certainly as a power play specialist. I do agree that being able to free up the $5.5 million that you otherwise would have paid Kuzmenko for next season is a big plus, because that gives you the ability to either re-sign Elias Lindholm, or of course put that money towards Elias Paterson, Philip Hronek, or all the other unrestricted free agents they have. And a reminder, this is not an inconsequential group of unrestricted free agents that they have. In the summer, you're looking at guys who have been contributors this year: Dakota Joshua, Teddy Bluger, Sam Lafferty, and then, of course, Ian Cole on defense, Nikita Zadorov, if any of them you think have futures with the Vancouver Canucks. So, look, he was not, Kuzmenko, a rec-tocket player. I think there was good evidence to suggest he was never going to be a rec-tocket player. That doesn't mean he couldn't have been helpful in the right spots at somewhere down the road here, either in the regular season or in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Let's bring Jeff Paterson in.
Let's do that.
Vancouver, our Canucks reporter, who is busy trying to get away on vacation. Jeff, your first blush thoughts at this big trade?
Yeah, I guess it's that I shouldn't try to take vacations at All-Star break anymore, because last year you guys got me on the golf course when Bo Horvat was dealt, and it's been the travel day from hell. I won't get into details, but I haven't left Vancouver. Spent most of the day at the airport and still on the ground here before trying to travel again tomorrow. So with all of that, my head wasn't exactly in the space of trying to break down a big trade, but have had some time, obviously, to process it all. And look, I mean, we've been talking for the last couple of weeks about the needs of this hockey club. I've said all along that they had to do something in their top six. Well, they've done that now. They get a right shot center, a guy that just turned 29 years of age, a couple of years removed from a 42-goal, 82-point season, and did it under Daryl Sutter. So he's got some experience in producing under a hard-nosed coach. It wasn't working for Kuzmenko. And we're just asking an awful lot of Elias Paterson to continue to try to play his way through what the coach perceived as a little bit of a midseason funk. And so they've gone and they've upgraded to that position. And now they've got two guys named Elias, and hopefully they can find some chemistry beyond their name. They're still going to have to figure out how to get Ilya Mikheyev going. But I like the player. I like the versatility that he brings. I like the fact that he's an absolute face-off ace, 53% for his career, but above that the last couple of seasons, and second on the Flames in shorthanded ice time this season, behind only Chris Tanev. Also, you would think that he probably replaces Pius Suter, who's been the stopgap on that first unit power play. So good opportunity for him there. I know it's been a down season for him offensively, but I think he's a better player than his numbers would indicate for this year at the very least. And yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a believer that the team that gets the better player, should win the trade, but obviously time will tell on what they had to give up. But the fact that they didn't have to touch Höglander or Podkolzin or Lekkerimäki or Verlander, to me, that represents a win as well.
So a few things there by way of follow-up, and I see Yerke with the comment there. This now makes 6 All-Stars for the Vancouver Canucks at All-Star Weekend in Toronto. Just an extraordinary number, because Elias Lindholm was the Calgary Flames representative. Face-off ace, Jeff, and I think you hit it. Right shot face-off ace. And gosh, how long have we been talking about getting some right-handed centers into the Vancouver Canucks lineup to balance things off? Look, the best player in the trade, and whoever gets them, that team wins. That's been thrown a little bit in a flux in the salary cap era. I think you can make a quantity for quality trade that works out in your favor. What I will say here is, as Jeff noted with the Horvat trade, once again, the Vancouver Canucks and Jim Rutherford, their president of hockey operations, early movers, move the market. Hell, he called his shot on Overdrive today, TSN, where Rutherford basically told the host there that we may make a trade before All-Star Weekend. And the other thing that this is going to do is I think it's going to make the other Western Conference contenders take note that the Vancouver Canucks are coming, and that they're coming with a much fuller deck than you might have suspected even just a couple of days ago.
Well, guys, I think if you look at the Canucks schedule, you probably have, coming out of the All-Star break, at Carolina, at Boston, and then those weekend matinees at Detroit and Washington, finally the easy game there in a 5.5 day stretch coming out of the All-Star break. Why wouldn't you load up if you knew that you were going to go all in here and pay a price to get a player? Why not bring him in? He's going to be able to have a little meet and greet in Toronto with half the roster, including the head coach, and get some intel on the way things are going. I mean, he's played in Calgary. Obviously, he has a pretty good handle on the Vancouver Canucks, and Zadorov's already in the locker room, at least for now. So, there's a lot of things that should ease the transition in that regard. But I think timing does play a factor in all of this, that we've talked about all these big games after the All-Star break with 33 to go. Could they have waited and seen where the market was and what the prices were going to be? Sure. But again, that's not in Jim Rutherford's nature. So I'm not surprised that they jumped the market, but also they're getting a quality piece here that's going to be available to them starting next Tuesday in Carolina, and then for all of those games the rest of the way. So I like it in that regard, because I do think that they need some reinforcements again, especially up front in their top six. So I like the timing of the deal. The one thing I'll say is mixed results for this player in the postseason. Now, he's been there 3 times, 17 points in 27 career postseason games. So he hasn't exactly lit it up in the playoffs. Of course, the Battle of Alberta on the wrong end a couple of years ago there, also in the bubble. So, you'd like to think that there are better days ahead in the playoffs, and certainly they're making this move here with an eye to the postseason. But, this isn't the guy that comes in as an absolute playoff ace, but there is some room for improvement there. And on this roster and with this group, the hope is that he'll get a chance to play deep into the playoffs and be productive when he's there.
Do you want him down the middle? Does Elias Paterson play the wing with Lindholm, or is it even that hybrid that they used to have with Miller sometimes, where Lindholm takes the draw perhaps, and yet it's Paterson who's prowling in the middle? How do you see this going down if those two are indeed together?
Yeah, and I think there is flexibility and versatility, and I think both of the Eliases have played both the middle and the wing. I think of Lindholm as a center, and so I won't be surprised if that's where the Canucks plug him in right away, because Elias Pettersson's been playing the wing here with JT Miller on the Lotto line when they were together for their recent run. So we know that he can be productive on the wing, but also Rick Tocchet has talked about wanting to get him back in the middle. So, I think that you've got 33 games here to sort of optimize your lineup to figure out who's best suited to play where. But my hunch, without having a chance to talk to Tocchet, will be that Lindholm will get the opportunity to play down the middle, and that they'll keep Elias Pettersson on the wing for the time being.
Yeah, and Blake, if you'll recall, our Frank Corrado, who joins us weekly on Sekeres and Price, TSN hockey analyst, former Vancouver Canuck, he really liked the fit of Elias Lindholm on the Vancouver Canucks based on what Lindholm does well and what other Vancouver Canucks players do well. I'll read this tweet from Jay Fresh Hockey because I think that speaks to it even further. He says he's an off-puck player specializing in getting open for high-danger looks rather than spending a lot of time with possession himself. Needs to play with strong passers and puck movers to excel. Well, that very much sounds like there could be a fantastic fit there with Elias Pettersson, who, as we all know, is a puck possession guy and is a very strong passer and a puck mover as well. I like what Jeff said, and this has long been a Rutherford philosophy. It is hard to integrate a player after the trade deadline when you're looking at, in a lot of cases, less than 20 games to get the guy in town and forging chemistry with his new teams. And his new line mates. In this case, you're going to have 33 games for this player to be able to associate and integrate with the current group of Vancouver Canucks. And then, guys, there's the look, and this is not something that we necessarily want to consider, that Vancouver Canucks fans necessarily want to consider. But right now, Elias Pettersson is unsigned. And if for whatever reason Elias Pettersson does not want to continue his career in Vancouver, you have brought a player in-house that you may well re-sign as the replacement for Elias, if Elias does want to be somewhere else after this season. I know nobody wants to think about that, but Patrick Allvin and Jim Rutherford are paid to consider a world without Elias Pettersson, and until EP's signature is on a contract, I think you have to consider that. That's at least got to be in the back of your mind. I do want to ask you both this, because I think we had the debate last week on the show. can you re-sign this player before you re-sign Elias Pettersson? Or is that too politically, is that sensitive political territory, Jeff? What do you think?
Well, just to go back to your earlier point about, insurance in the event that Elias Pettersson leaves, Lindholm set to hit the open market on July 1st, as Patrick Allvin and Jim Rutherford keep saying, well, they've got this player under club control for a year beyond this. And so there are decisions that would have to be made and dominoes that would have to fall. But there is only so much money to go around. And this is another player that's going to command an awful lot of it and probably a long term here. Mm-hmm. And so you've got Paterson that, they have made their pitch to, and ball's in his court. But obviously, Philip Hronek's going to require some attention as well. Sure, the cap's going up, but the OEL situation. So, it's another big domino in all of this. If we want to put it in, another ball in the air as they juggle all of these decisions, to me, the fact that this didn't come with an extension built in, that it wasn't a sign and trade or anything like that, they're looking at this player in the here and now to help them as a rental with the opportunity, I suppose, to buy long term. But I think that there is going to be a feeling out process on both sides here. Perhaps Elias Lindholm wasn't prepared to commit to the Vancouver Canucks at this stage. Maybe he wants to sort of get a feel for the situation and the lay of the land. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a delicate dance. There's no doubt about that. How much money does each of the Eliases get in all of this, and who would go first? And yeah, I mean, these are all things that have to be considered, certainly. But at the end of the day, they have Elias Lindholm now for the remainder of this season. He makes them a better hockey club. And you hope that he's excited that, the Flames are a 500 team. And they're at the point where the Canucks have been the last couple of years. You can look at them and say, oh, they're not that far from the playoff bar, but they're a 500 team essentially at the 50 game mark. They would have to get on an absolute heater to be a playoff team this year. I don't think it's going to happen. They're a weaker team now, obviously, without Lindholm. So I think they've sort of made their decision there. I hope Elias Lindholm is excited to get the opportunity to come here and perform for a team that obviously has shown what it's capable of to this point. And now adding a piece like this, who knows what is their limit? They've gone all in here. Clearly, they think that they can make some noise come playoff time.
Let's just work in our listener there, Lyle, who says, or it could convince Paterson to convince him to resign because he gets excited, either because they have a deep playoff run here or because they find a way somehow to keep both Elias's Lindholm as the UFA, Paterson as the RFA this summer. Sorry, Blake.
As I've said from the start, though, with regards to the Paterson decision about when to sign, he's made his bed there. I mean, if they make overtures to Lindholm and he wants to sign between now and the trade deadline, now and the end of the season, I mean, they've tried with Paterson, and they can always make it abundantly clear, hey, we're signing Lindholm. Your money's here too. Don't worry. When you want to come get it, it's here. But that's an Elias Pettersson decision. And I'm not knocking Pettersson for that decision, but he's got to understand the business continues. The earth continues to revolve around the sun. And they have to conduct other business. So I don't think that can reasonably be considered if they do want to re-sign with Lindholm. And think about
it's not just the politic; it's also the commit the dollars and then not have enough for Pettersson. So there's two different prongs there. One, the political sensibilities of you've waited so long to commit long term to Pettersson to begin with. Secondly, do you want to commit money to Lindholm before you commit money to Pettersson? But I hear
two things have happened positively. Two things have happened positively there. They've of course gotten rid of the second year of Kuzmenko that we talked about, and they've got a little bit more cap space in the here and now. And if you want to talk, this isn't definitive yet, but it sounds like they're not sold on Nikita Zadorov, as we have sort of seen from the coach. But, there's been these little bits of rumors and innuendo that maybe they could even flip Zadorov between now and the trade deadline. And maybe that becomes a cheaper option rather than re-signing that former Flame and giving him a pay bump going into next season as well.
Wouldn't it be amazing, and wouldn't it cap Patrick Allvin's massive year if he takes the door off, flips him to the Leafs for a second-round pick after getting him for a third-round pick from Calgary?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in some cases, deadline prices soar because teams get a little bit desperate. Let's just unpack a couple of other things here before we move on. We mentioned the season that Hunter Brzustewicz is having. Let's put some numbers to that season. He was the 75th overall pick in last June's draft, a right shot American defenseman, 6 foot and 188 pounds. He has 8 goals, 61 assists for 69 points in 47 games, gentlemen. It's just an outstanding year in the OHL. And somehow, someway, didn't get invited to the American World Junior Camp, possibly because he chose the Canadian developmental route system. Then there's Joni Jurmo. So I think we can say they are selling Hunter Brzustewicz at a very high ebb here. Who knows if Hunter Brzustewicz will ever look as good as he does right now. People liked Joni Jurmo as a third-round shot-in-the-dark pick, 82nd overall in the 2020 draft, because he had size and could move a little bit, 6'3", 207. He's now 21, will be 22 years old in April, has 2 points in 6 games for his current team, and that was after being moved from Tampere, which is a legendary Finnish side, where he had but the 1 assist in 28 games. Really, guys, this is shedding a contract for the Vancouver Canucks. So the interesting part of this deal for me is you have Kuzmenko, who's probably at low ebb in his NHL career. Brzustewicz, the prospect that's probably at high ebb on the other end, being the centerpieces to this deal, along, of course, with the first-round pick. How much are we sweating the loss of the first-round pick this year, gents?
I think based on the Horvat model of a year ago, you expected that this was going to be sort of the centerpiece. And, it's looking more and more like it's going to be a late first rounder. And I think I'm okay with that. I mean, I don't love the idea of moving first when you think of how often they have done it, not just this regime, but obviously the previous one sort of in job preservation mode. They've been active and certainly peddled more first rounders than most teams and more than I think I'd like. But given the circumstances, I think that this was draft capital that they were prepared to spend based on the season that they're having. Brzustewicz is going to be fascinating to watch. I mean, the guy has done everything and then some as a defenseman in his draft plus 1 year in the Ontario Hockey League. But, as he develops, if Quinn Hughes is here, like I know he's a right shot guy, but ultimately there's a world in which Quinn Hughes is just, blowing the world apart on the power play for a decade still in Vancouver. I think maybe you're selling high here. And I think that their pro scouts and their amateur scouts deserve the benefit of the doubt with the moves that they've made already this season. So as much as I want to see him continue to develop, I guess we'll do it from afar and see ultimately when he lands in Calgary and what that looks like for him. Jurmo is wild to me because to see him with your own eyes at development camp, like it's breathtaking. This guy has, to the eye, every tool imaginable, and yet in game action, for whatever reason, it just doesn't all come together. And there were issues about puck management and decision making and sort of being a beat slow at the leagues that he's playing in. So you can imagine if they ever got him to the American Hockey League or the NHL, I think it's going to be a climb for him. So I have no issues whatsoever with him being included in all of that. And ultimately, Kuzmenko, I hope that he finds his scoring touch again. He's such a fun player. What a wild year and a half when we look back on Andrei Kuzmenko's time in Vancouver. They win the Derby to sign him, bursts onto the scene and scores all these goals with a big smile, takes the city by storm, and then can't score a goal to save his life here and can't get into the lineup on some nights. So I was just kind of racking my brain trying to think.
Pierce, we've lost Jeff there. Blake, He was racking his brain and Jeff, you're back. You were racking your brain about what? A player who has been like a comet here, Andrei Kuzmenko. He was there, he burned bright, and then boy, did he burn out quickly.
Man, oh man, yeah.
I imagine a decade from now, we'll all be sitting around. Remember there was that Russian guy that was here for a short while. And again, I hope he finds his scoring touch because it has been a difficult year, obviously, for him. But the fact that they are able to move off that contract and, as Blake said, even free up a little smidge, every dollar helps at this time. And I don't think they're done. I think if they can find a way, these guys, I think, kind of get in that groove and, they want to just continue to show the hockey world that in a time when everybody else says you can't make trades, all the Canucks seem to do is make deals. So I don't think they're done.
Jeff, speaking of which, let's ask you this before you go. Chris Tanev, is that on the menu? Do you think there's all these rumors that it was going to be a part of this deal? Do you think Chris Tanev at the end of the day is going to be a Vancouver Canuck again?
Where there's smoke, there seems to be the opportunity for a fire here. So, if the stories are true, and no reason to doubt that, Quinn Hughes has lobbied to get him back here. And we know how popular he was in that room and a seamless fit, like on a lot of levels. I think Adam Foote and Rick Tocchet would love to get their hands on a leader and a veteran and a guy that just eats shots for lunch and penalty kill and all that kind of stuff. So I have to believe that, they've gone down that road once. Now they'll circle back. And, again, you got to be careful about the price you paid, and you've cleared out some of your assets here. So, can it be done? As I said, I think they did well not to touch the top tier prospects. I don't think I'd like them to part with any of those for a 34-year-old at this stage of his career if he's just a rental, but let's see where it goes. But again, something tells me, just with as active as they've been, I think that there probably is another deal, even if it's not a Tanev, but I think that there is probably another deal to bolster the Canucks blue line.
Would a Tanev deal necessitate a Zadorov deal, gentlemen?
I think one of the big salaries probably has to go, whether that's Mikheyev or Zadorov, to probably make the most amount of sense, because I think they do want to add one more depth forward as well, whether that's a Henrique or somebody like that as well. So to make that all work, one of those big salaries probably has to go as well.
Jeff?
Yeah, I think so. And it just, again, it feels like it's more than just noise with Zadorov right now. Like, for whatever reasons, Rick Tocchet's talked about wanting this giant, defense core, and he's got him, but something kind of feels off there. Mm-hmm. And again, feels like it's more than just noise right now. So certainly a player to keep an eye on, I think.
I saw the comment from one of our listeners saying would not be surprised to see Kuzmenko rip it up in Calgary. I think that's one thing Canucks fans have to prepare themselves for, as we've talked about for a long time now, since he started struggling and being healthy scratched by Rick Tocchet, that Rick Tocchet plays a specific system and demands specificity within that system. Not every coach is going to have that exact system or style, and then Andrei Kuzmenko could well flourish somewhere else. And Jeff, I found myself thinking, as you were talking about Kuzmenko, in 10 years from now, sitting around going, who is that Russian forward again who burns so bright? McGillney, Bure, Krutov, Larionov, Kuzmenko. Seems like all Russian forwards come to Vancouver for a brief moment, burn brightly, or in some cases brighter than others, and move right along. I do think that Zadorov or some sort of salary is going to have to move out if they're adding Chris Tanev. And there's part of me that wonders whether we're just looking at a depth defenseman and a depth forward from this point forward, deadline wise. If that is the case, guys, where do you think the biggest need is now? What's the one trade you would like to see before the deadline to bolster this team going into the Stanley Cup playoffs?
I'd like them to trade like a 7th round pick to get early season Ilya Mikheyev back. Is that possible? Could they do that? Because he's still a massive question mark and a wild card. It was there early on, and it has just gone ice cold. And how's he going to react to a buddy of his that comes from the Milstein stable? And he's still got Zadorov there, but it is a countryman and a guy that he was able to communicate with and all those types of things. So I'm curious to see how, it's part of the business, and Ilya Mikheyev's seen teammates come and go. But this is a little bit different, and I hope that it doesn't have any sort of adverse effect, because they could use his speed, and they could use tenacity on the forecheck and all those types of things. It's there, it's in him, we've seen it, but for whatever reason, it's disappeared. So I like 5 of their top 6, but if Mikheyev isn't able to hold up his end of the bargain, then there's still some questions about top 6, even on a team that among the league leaders in scoring. Goals haven't necessarily been the issue, but man, I'd just like to see Ilya Mikheyev be able to leave more of a mark on the hockey club. That said, you can never have too much depth on D. We've seen that over the years with the Vancouver Canucks, and if they do go on a lengthy playoff run, pretty good chance that they could add or they could stand to use even a little bit more depth back there.
I'll go right shot D. I'll be boring. I think that hey, if you can turn Zadorov into a right shot D that Tocchet likes to play in all situations, I think he'd do backflips.
All right, well, great stuff. Jeff, we certainly hope you get to your vacation destination without any kind of hassle tomorrow. Thank you for being available on short notice somewhere near YVR tonight. Blake and I are going to have more on the Friday edition of Sekeres and Price. We want to thank everybody for joining this emergency edition of Sekeres and Price.
Great Clips is the official hair salon of the National Hockey League. There are 37 salons in Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, all Canadian owned and operated. Download the app and find the nearest to you. When you're up next for a cut, you'll get a ready next text. Great Clips. It's going to be great.
My family's very own whiskey, barrel-aged and set apart, marked with VO, artfully blended, impeccably crafted, as a wedding gift to my son, for the bride and groom. And now, over a century later, from our very own family to yours, a legacy rooted in whiskey. Seagram's VO, growing deeper, reaching out, raising a glass to your legacy. Seagram's VO, make it your very own.
Hey, gang, if you're finding yourself a little directionless without purpose on a game night, may I recommend Greta. It's a great spot to catch the game throughout the season. They're at 50 West Cordova, so you're on foot. You're just walking to and from the game. It's a lot of fun. It's a go-to spot for food, drink specials, and fun before and after the game. They do have specials every day. They've got all-day happy hour on Wednesdays, and they've got all those arcade games to keep you busy as well. So make it a fun game night at 50 West Cordova, Greta Bar and Grill. Visit them at gretabar.com. Well, folks, we will have lots more coming up on Friday, needless to say. Lots to discuss with regards to this trade, who's going to go where, the positions of each of these centermen with wingers, which centermen get doubled up. Is the Lotto line back in the fold here? Or, where you have Elias Lindholm, maybe with a couple of wingers, is another opportunity for depth as well. But saw a lot of reaction on the internet in the wake of this trade saying, wow, to have a team with JT Miller, Elias Lindholm, and Elias Paterson down the middle. I think a lot of people are looking at this team playoff-wise through the playoff prism, Matt, thinking not many other teams can boast what the Vancouver Canucks have. And I think they marveled at the performance that they've seen so far this season by this team, but I don't know that they saw the piece and said,
yeah,
nobody else has got that. They are now.
Yeah, and sorry, Blake, I thought we were wrapping up there, but yeah, it's an impressive looking group right now. As you always say, you've always got Lotto line in your quiver, so that is always something that I think Tocchet and the coaching staff can go to if need be. I like how Grady has it set up there on the visual with Lindholm and Pedersen and Mikheyev playing with each other, Miller, Piasuter, and Besser. And let's remember how good Piasuter has looked on that line. You've got center depth there because you've got two guys in Pedersen and Suter who can slide over and play center ice. And boy, how valuable that would be in a Stanley Cup playoff series. Heck, you got seven centers because Lafferty can slide over and play the center. What I will say, and what I said earlier in the show, is you aren't the deepest forward group. If you were to lose a couple of forwards in the Stanley Cup playoffs, suddenly I think you're playing with a pretty short bench and some guys that you don't necessarily trust. Now, that's for right now. They could very well add a depth forward, and in fact, I would suspect they would look to add a depth forward from this point forward. But for the moment, that group of 12 forwards, and particularly given the way the Bluger Joshua Garland line is played, that top nine, that looks pretty imposing. And look at what it lacks in the absolute superstar power of the Edmonton Oilers and Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. And we all know how good that Oilers team is playing right now. And we all know how much scoring the Oilers have at the top end of their roster. Vancouver could counter and say, we're coming with a little bit more depth of forward, a little more depth of scoring.
You look at teams that go deep in the playoffs. It's surprising with the injuries who ends up playing. I mean, again, this is parked in the back of your mind here, folks. But if the Canucks do go on a long playoff run, Vasily Podkolzin is going to be a black ace. He's going to be with the team. He's going to be around. He is starting to warm up again. He had himself a heck of a weekend last weekend. It's a good sign. I'm not saying call him up now by any stretch of the imagination. You might not see him at all in the regular season, period. But it's good to see that Podkolzin looking like Vasily Podkolzin down there. And then in addition, I think, I don't think a guy like an Adam Henrique or we've talked about guys, as well like Monahan. I don't think they're going to be that expensive. Hey, everything comes with a cost. But given what we've just seen with Lindholm and the fact that the Canucks, again, sent a struggling $5.5 million winger the other way, I don't think this was a great cost. So if this is what Lindholm is getting, my gosh, I don't think Monahan's going to be that expensive. And if they can go out and make that happen too, holy cow.
Wow. Well, that would be quite extraordinary, particularly when you look at what people have surmised, including our friend Frank Saravelli on the asking price of Sean Monahan as a late first-round pick. You've just moved a late first-round pick out. I see all the comments there about Mikheyev's next, and I understand what you and Jeff are saying. Let's get one thing straight. Mikheyev is in a slump. Kuzmenko was just never going to be a Tocchet-style player. I think there is a distinction there. Not to mention the fact that Ilya Mikheyev is a pretty darn good skater on a team that, let's face it, isn't blazing fast. He's able to kill penalties. I still think that there's value in Ilya Mikheyev, and I would be surprised to see the Vancouver Canucks move him between now and the deadline. I think push should come to shove with Andrei Kuzmenko. I think we're still a ways away from that with Ilya Mikheyev. If it's going to be another depth forward, Blake, it either has to be somebody who's pretty. So a couple of things. If you get a big injury and you're able to go into long-term injured reserve for the rest of the season, that would be one thing. That would open up all markets. But with where they are cap-wise now, and they have saved a little bit on this Kuzmenko for Lindholm trade, not a lot, but $650K or thereabouts. I think it's going to have to be a lower cost forward. I mean, Adam Henrique's a $5.8 million cap hit right now. Even if the Anaheim Ducks were to retain 50% of the salary there, I still think you're talking about a player who's pretty rich. I mean, and Sean Monahan even is a couple million dollar guy there. So I would suspect that if there is another forward to add, it would be a little deeper in the season, a little closer to trade deadline, when you don't have to take on as much salary as you do in the here and now. And I would like to think, I would think at this stage of the proceedings, unless you get an LTIR situation, that you're looking at a affordable player, both from a money point of view and from a what they will cost to bring them in. Cap
friendly's got them at almost 1.9 million in cap space right now. So you'd need to be moving some salary probably at the same time, and expect, if it's one of those bigger price guys, some holding back from the team that is sending them out as well. So you need a little bit of help for sure. But if the Sidorov smoke does contain a fire underneath it, there's some salary cap relief right there, and that might be a completely separate deal. There might be a bunch of wheeling and dealing here, Matt, and we wondered if it might go down here at the All-Star break here with some time to just sit in their thoughts. And gosh, I'm not putting it beyond the possibility that by the time they take to the ice again in a week's time, that maybe there's another trade that we're talking about.
Yeah, I would be surprised there. I think they're going to drop Lindholm into this lineup in Carolina when they get back at it after the All-Star game and see how that goes. I do think more work is needed here. Interestingly, and everyone's saying Tanev, and I understand, a beloved former Vancouver Canuck, a playoff-style player, the way he eats pucks and defends. and a guy who can play the right side, which of course would balance out your lefties and your righties. Remember, we've quite liked Noah Juulsen this year, and Carson Soucy will be back at some point. I guess I think the one thing that the Vancouver Canucks hierarchy is probably going to have to decide here over the next month or so, Blake, is do we want to add yet another consequential piece with some salary a la a Chris Tanev, or do we want to add some volume, a depth defenseman and a depth forward that maybe in totality of their salaries add up to something a little closer to Chris Tanev? Do they feel they need more quality now, or do they feel they need more quantity? I think that's a big question for
If I'm Rick Tocchet, I want 6 guys to start. And you're always going to subtract because of injury during the playoffs, but I want 6 guys that I believe in. Like, gutturally, I believe in them, And I don't know that he's got those 6 guys right now. I think he loves Juulsen as a depth piece, but I don't know if he's a guy that he wants to start with those top 6 theoretical guys at this, put him in pen on game 1. I don't know if he wants Juulsen to be that. I think he wants Juulsen to be the first bit of relief.
Yeah, well, if you're healthy with Soucy, theoretically, Juulsen is your 7th guy, right?
That's with Zadorov, but I don't think he feels it with Zadorov. That's the thing. So
Sean's asking there, what kind of package do you think Tanev is fetching? It's a great question. I would have to say, look, I don't think there's any way that Calgary's going to let him go for less than a second round pick plus something else.
I thought second and a prospect. Yeah.
How
good that prospect is. Like somebody, another bit of feedback I think off YouTube was pods for Tanev. Boy, that's pretty rich for a 34-year-old guy. I don't know.
Well, and listening to you talk about Podkolzin and him potentially being of help. The one thing I would say is, a few things I would say. Linus Karlsson has been the guy they've called up. We still haven't seen Archie Baines. Baines is leading them in scoring. He's an AHL All-Star, and he's a responsible two-way forward, not to mention a local kid who I think the market would go bananas for if he did anything of substance with the Vancouver Canucks. And then if any of those Abbotsford forwards are going to be trusted in a Stanley Cup playoff game, then there's probably about 2, 3, 4 more weeks before they look. I think you would need to see that player over at least a month of NHL play before you trust them in a Stanley Cup playoff game. Could you see Tocchet throwing a kid in the Stanley Cup playoffs without a proper sort of baptism? I have a little bit of trouble with that. So I would think that if any of those Abbotsford forwards, MJD saying Ratu in the package for Tanev, but Baines, Podkolzin, Ratu, any of those guys, if they're going to play Stanley Cup playoff games, then I think they have to be Vancouver Canucks and playing regularly by March 15th.
Hey, necessity is the mother of invention. And, you think back to 2011, did any of us expect that Chris Tanev was going to be playing 5 games? You need what you need because you need it. And you just want to have guys that theoretically can do the job. The fact that Podkolzin's played as many NHL games as he has, I think puts him to the front line. He is second on the team in scoring now down in Abbotsford. I don't think we saw that coming, especially with the injury that he sustained. So there's lots to like there. I think they're going to let him cook for another month or so at least before they even consider bringing him up. But, I don't know that they need much more than I would like some more depth for sure, some more forward depth. But I think one more body, like a legitimate National Hockey League body, is probably good enough if you have any sort of confidence in a guy like Baines or Podkolzin. I think those guys are probably going to rear their head before the end of the regular season and ultimately, again, be a black ace come playoff time.
Yeah, I think they need injuries to get into the lineup, and then I think they need to make an impression. So I think we're a couple of steps away from them. I am somewhat interested in using some of them as trade chips by the deadline here. I do think that Vasily Podkolzin is likely on his final opportunity with the Vancouver Canucks whenever he gets that next opportunity. And remember, he is not a player of this regime. It was the previous regime that drafted him. So I think if the right offer is there to bolster this club at the NHL level with proven NHL players, then I think you have to look at Vasily Podkolzin as a potential trade chip. Interesting. Like Di Giuseppe has a little bit of sort of playoff style to his game. Is there any chance that he makes a recovery and has a comeback within his comeback, if you will, here, Blake? Because we were talking about him so much over those first 8 to 10 games when he was playing well on that Besser and JT Miller line. You know, Baines, I'm intrigued. Ratu, just because he's a center iceman or feasibly can play the center, but as we've talked about with the lineup you've got now, you got potentially 7 guys who can play the middle. So you wonder if Ratu is not a little bit more blocked today with this acquisition of Lindholm, not to mention, given the work of Teddy Blue or given the work of Sam Lafferty and guys who are playing on the big club. So, I look at the entirety of that Abbotsford group now, and frankly, with the exception of the goaltender Seeloffs, who I think is probably still in the long-term plans and is likely to be Thatcher Demko's backup as soon as potentially next season. Maybe McWard is a little bit different as well, because I think he's a guy that they specifically targeted. We're happy to get, and he's a right shot defenseman. But I take a look at the rest of the Abbotsford group, and I wonder if that's more trade fodder than that is NHL help this year, and particularly in the Stanley Cup playoffs.
I mean, of the prospects, I think you got to be very careful with Podkolzin. He's an interesting specimen. He's 22 years of age for another 6 months. Like, he's still so young. And the fact that now he is actually showing signs of traction, boy, I'd be very careful if I were the Vancouver Canucks in that one. And on to Ratu, it's funny, I don't have any particular heartstrings attached to him, but he just turned 21. He's tied for second with Podkolzin in scoring on that team. I mean, not many 21, 22-year-olds are tied for second in AHL scoring, with a guy who just turned 23, incidentally, leading the way in R.C. Baines. I mean, to have 3 youngsters doing so well down the farm, you got to be pretty convinced that maybe that's their high end before you make any trade. Or if you're going to trade them, by all means, they're not untouchable, but I want a guy with term coming back, or I want a guy who wants to re-sign with the Vancouver Canucks at a reasonable freight coming back the other way. So it just for a rental, boy, I don't know. It would have to be one heck of a rental for one of those guys to be pried loose for me.
Yeah, and I hear you, Blake, but the rest of the league looks at Vasily Podkolzin as a first-round pick who's on the verge of going bust. We're holding a candle for him because he's the 10th overall pick. We're holding a candle for him because he represented something bright about the future when this team was in very, very dark days. And yeah, you got to like the bounce back that you're seeing in Abbotsford. And they are saying all the right things about him with regards to, we're going to make sure he's ready the next time that he comes on up. But I just don't think he can be untouchable. Like you have declared with the trade you made today, not to mention with the extension that you signed Patrick Allvin to today, that this year and the 3 years subsequent are your window. Like that's what you're looking at competitively. And of course, I say that's assuming you get a deal done with Elias Paterson. That's assuming you get a deal done with Philip Hronek, who have course been such big parts of this turnaround and the fantastic hockey club that we've watched through 50 games here this season. So, as it stands right now, you're pretty much all in on this year. And if you want to extend it any, it's going to be a window of the next 2 to 3 years while these managers are still under contract, while Thatcher Demko and Quinn Hughes are still on good value contracts. So I think anything that helps you win most acutely this year, but if it happens to be able to help you over the next 2 to 3 years after this season, I think that's absolutely where Rutherford and Allvin's attention and focus is in. They said and were quite honest about how they felt like they had to give this group the best chance, that they had deserved the right to get more help and to be a better hockey club come late April in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And you got to hand it to them because they put their money where their mouth is today with a very big swing and a very big trade.
Light Engine on YouTube saying in the comments here, how excited should we be here? Are we going all the way? and I get it, Light Engine.
Well,
I get it. It's pretty exciting stuff. Like honestly, it's a pinch yourself moment if you're a Canucks fan from the depths of the last decade to where they find themselves now as a first place team making deals for, if he's not a first line center, he's a second line center in Elias Lindholm. It's a pinch yourself moment. I really can't believe that that's what we're talking about.
And he figures to be the biggest name or one of the biggest names and likely the biggest name centerman to be traded between now and March 8th. I mean, it would be quite surprising if there's a centerman dealt over the next five or 6 weeks who has had more NHL success than Elias Lindholm at this stage of the proceedings. Now, Jake Gensel might be traded from Pittsburgh, and for some, Jake Gensel is the superior player with all the scoring he has done on Sidney Crosby's wing. But, I think it already stands here on January 31st that the Vancouver Canucks are walking away with one of the deadline prizes, one of the guys who will probably be on the podium of best deadline players moved. Now, there's a couple of ways to look at that. One is that we put a whole lot of emphasis on the trade deadline, and oftentimes it's that under the radar move with a pre-existing good team that has more impact than the team that's on the cusp that's looking to add the big name. But the other side of that is the Vancouver Canucks just got significantly better if this player plays to his reputation, and particularly if he plays beyond where he's gone this year. And there's reason to believe that he could do that with the right fit of line mates in Vancouver. And if that's the case, then yeah, absolutely. Dare to dream. It's a hell of a Western Conference this year with an Edmonton team that's won 16 in a row and has one of the, two of the great players in the world, two of the great players of their generation. You've got the defending Stanley Cup champion Vegas Golden Knights who are going to get Jack Eichel back and may conveniently have him, miss enough time to load up LTIR wise at the deadline. And then you have some pretty good looking teams in the Central, including a recent Stanley Cup champion, the Colorado Avalanche, who have just passed the Vancouver Canucks in terms of goals per game into top spot in the NHL. I believe Colorado's averaging 0.04 goals more than Vancouver, but both of them are near 4 goals per game. So it's a hell of a field. It's a hell of a gauntlet. But with the player that they've added today, particularly at what is being subtracted from the club, which, let's face it, is not much the way Andrei Kuzmenko was playing, they have taken a significant step towards getting through this Western Conference gauntlet, or at least giving themselves the best chance to advance multiple rounds in the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Likely a good fit too, system wise. It works in a lot of ways, and I don't think it's a grotesque overpay. You got to give up something. You have to pay. You don't get these kinds of players for free. The Canucks paid a cost, but I think it's a reasonable one. And right now on Twitter, 91%, and on YouTube, I just saw over 1,000 votes already. So thanks for all your attention there, folks. And 87% on YouTube here saying that they like the trade as well. So people knew that it was going to come with a cost, Matt. And it sounds like Canuck Nation as a whole are more than willing to pay the price right now to improve.
Well, in that regard, Blake, I think this management group traded the right players, especially with regards to where the market was at. They did not trade World Junior MVP Jonathan Lekramacky. They did not trade first-round pick Tom Wielander, the right shot defenseman. They traded the nameless, faceless first-round pick this year, which, if they were to advance to the Stanley Cup final, would be in the 30s. If they make the conference final, would be no better than 29th. That's right at the end of a first round that, let's face it, people aren't clamoring about this first round in this draft as much as they have previous drafts, particularly last year. They traded Brzustewicz, who I think people were excited about, but he's a little bit of a deeper cut for your casual Vancouver Canucks fan. I'm not sure they're tracking every third round pick that's out there. So, in that sense, he wasn't a World Junior player. So in that sense, he wasn't quite as known or as coveted by this fan base. And I think everybody realized that, it had reached the end with Andrei Kuzmenko. It needed to be resolved and be resolved permanently, that he just wasn't going to get back into Rick Tockett's good graces, that he is just not ever going to be a Rick Tocchet style player. And of course, they did not trade Nils Höglander, Blake, who
No.
and the way this trade is received from Vancouver Canucks fans, if that's Nils Höglander as opposed to Andrei Kuzmenko, we'd heard his name out there. We'd even heard that the Calgary Flames were most interested in him as a player. So to be able to keep Höglander, Lekkerimäki, and Wielander out of this trade, I think is why you're seeing all the raves and everybody all Canucks fans loving this trade to the extent that they do.
My party words tonight will come from Cody Sweet on Twitter. I want a whole team of just Elias's and Nils's. Somewhere
Right.
there has to be a hockey player named Elias Höglander or Nils Paterson.
Right.
We've done the homework. There's an 18-year-old playing for guess who? Moto Jr., 18, undrafted Nils Paterson. Please, for the love of all that's holy, Vancouver Canucks, go get Nils Paterson.
Maybe we could get an Elias Nils or a Nils Elias somewhere if we look deep enough on elite prospects and hockey DB play. Marvelous stuff. This time we're ending for real. I said goodbye last time. We were just saying goodbye to Jeff. So thanks for everybody for tuning in. We're going to have more on Sekeres and Price on Friday.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, everybody, if you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres and Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.